After 1975, when the People's Army of Vietnam took over control from the former Republic of Vietnam regime, Vietnam launched campaigns to reclaim islands in the Spratly archipelago. These islands had been disputed and occupied by various countries for a long time, since the collapse of the Nguyen dynasty. In 1988, alongside the deployment of Vietnamese naval vessels to reefs to establish sovereignty markers, China also sent its military forces to the Spratly Islands. At the initial stage, upon encountering Vietnamese forces, the Chinese side broadcast warnings via loudspeakers, demanding that Vietnam withdraw and leave the reefs for China to take over. However, the Vietnamese Navy ignored these threats. They even uprooted Chinese flags planted on the reefs and replaced them with the red flag of Vietnam right in front of the opposing forces. Since neither side had any intention of backing down, a series of clashes eventually erupted, later known in history as the Spratly Islands Naval Battle. The conflict broke out at Gac Ma Reef, Co Linh Reef, and Len Dao Reef on the morning of March 14, 1988. China's forces included 3 destroyers: Destroyer 502, Jiang Nan class, displacement 1,400 tons, armed with 3 100mm guns and 8 37mm guns; Destroyer 556, Jiang Fu class, displacement 1,925 tons, armed with 4 100mm guns and 2 37mm guns; Destroyer 531, Jiang Dong class, displacement 1,925 tons, armed with 4 100mm guns and 8 37mm guns. Vietnam's forces consisted of 3 unarmed or lightly armed transport ships: HQ 505, formerly the USS Whitemarsh, LST 509, HQ 604, a 500-ton transport ship, HQ 605, another 500-ton transport ship. This clearly shows that at the time hostilities erupted at Gac Ma, Co Linh, and Len Dao, China held overwhelming military superiority. China possessed fully armed warships with long-range firepower capable of striking targets over 20 kilometers away. Meanwhile, Vietnam had only 3 transport vessels that were either unarmed or poorly armed, with soldiers equipped only with personal weapons such as AK-47 rifles and RPG-7 B-41 launchers, whose effective range was only a few hundred meters. During the engagement, Chinese warships could fire at Vietnamese vessels from a distance beyond Vietnamese reach. Vietnamese forces were unable to attack Chinese ships due to the absence of naval artillery and could only use personal weapons during landing operations to prevent Chinese troops from seizing the reefs. This imbalance placed Vietnam at a severe disadvantage at Gac Ma. Around 2 a.m. on March 14th, a group of Vietnamese engineers aboard HQ 604 was ordered to land on the reef to survey and select a site for construction. They erected a pole to serve as a flagstaff, asserting sovereignty. By 5 a.m., 5 personnel, including First Lieutenant Nguyen Mout Phong, Island Commander, and Second Lieutenant Tron Von Fern, Deputy Commander, were present on the reef. Chinese naval troops advanced and uprooted Vietnamese flag. Vietnamese soldiers formed a circle around the flag to protect it. The 2 sides stood face to face at a distance of only about 1 meter. Physical scuffles broke out as the Chinese attempted to seize the flag. Chinese soldiers then opened automatic fire, indiscriminately shooting at Vietnamese engineering troops. The Vietnamese commander, Tron Duc Tong, ordered sailors from HQ 604 to land and form a defensive line to support their comrades and protect the flag. About 40 sailors landed with basic tools, such as crowbars and shovels, as they were construction personnel. They fought hand-to-hand against Chinese forces. Later, a Chinese officer fired warning shots, which had no effect. Chinese forces escalated the violence. They fired directly at Second Lieutenant Tron Von Fern, who was wounded. Corporal Nguyen Von Lung was also injured. According to Vietnamese reports, before collapsing, Tron Von Fern shouted, "We would rather sacrifice ourselves than surrender our sovereignty. Let my blood dye the flag of the People's Navy." Although China initiated the attack and possessed overwhelming firepower, in reports to international organizations, China claimed that Vietnamese forces fired first and wounded a Chinese soldier, forcing China to retaliate in self-defense. At 8:88 a.m., Chinese warships unleashed massive firepower, including 12.7mm heavy machine guns, 37mm cannons, 76.2mm and 100mm naval guns, and multi-barrel rocket launchers, devastating HQ 604 and Vietnamese troops on the reef. HQ 604 was riddled with holes and gradually sank. Brigade Deputy Commander Tron Duc Tung, Captain Vu Phi Tru, and many sailors went down with the ship at Gac Ma. At Co Lin Reef, HQ 505, under Captain Vu He Lei, was heavily shelled by Chinese destroyers. Despite severe damage, the crew made the critical decision to run the ship aground on the reef to prevent it from sinking, thereby successfully maintaining Vietnam's presence and sovereignty. At Lin Dao Reef, HQ 605, commanded by Captain Lei Length Sen, landed troops to plant the Vietnamese flag. Chinese destroyers soon arrived, threatening and then attacking. HQ 605 was repeatedly shelled, caught fire, and eventually sank at 8:20 a.m. On March 14, 1988, Chinese forces fired 285 rounds of 100mm shells, 266 rounds of 37mm shells, not including smaller caliber ammunition. Vietnamese losses included 2 ships sunk, 1 ship heavily damaged, 64 soldiers killed, 11 wounded, 70 missing, of whom 9 were later returned by China, while others were presumed dead. Vietnamese reports also stated that Chinese warships blocked Red Cross vessels from rescuing survivors, an act violating fundamental principles of international humanitarian law. Although often labeled a naval battle, the events at Gac Ma in reality were a massacre. Vietnamese troops did not fire a single shot during the initial confrontation, yet were subjected to overwhelming and brutal force. These events later prompted Vietnam to plan a counter-operation known as Campaign CQ-88, marking a new phase in Vietnam's determination to defend sovereignty in the Spratly Islands. The bloodshed at Gac Ma remains a solemn reminder of sacrifice, sovereignty, and unresolved tensions in the South China Sea. As you can see, the Paracel and Spratly Islands currently belong to Vietnam. Over the years, China has consistently sought to seize these islands and create the 9-dash line to expand its territory in the South China Sea, thereby escaping the encirclement by the U.S. and its allies. In your opinion, is China's action right or wrong? Please leave a comment and share your thoughts. Let's discuss this issue together.